Hello and welcome to this industry webinar brought to you by the Cyber Hut. My name is Simon Moffat, and in today's webinar we are going to deep dive into the world of identity threats and specifically identity threat detection and response. What that means, why is it important now, and then we're going to have a really fascinating panel discussion with some global industry experts from around the world who are absolute visionaries and thought leaders in the worlds of identity and access management and security. Before we dive into today's content, a little bit of housekeeping to start with. Clearly, we are on Zoom today. Which means everybody is pretty much centrally muted. But we do, of course, have the webinar chat and the webinar Q&A functionality. So please feel free to enter your questions and comments as we go through today's content. We will leave a few minutes at the end to wrap up any questions which we can't answer, but I will try and stitch in everybody's questions as we go in real time. Today's webinar is also recorded, so you will be sent a follow-up email afterwards with access to the recording if you so wish to watch it again. So today's agenda, we'll split this into two halves really. I want to spend the first part really sort of setting the seed a little bit around ITDR, yet another acronym focused on identity threat detection and response. The Cyber Hut has been involved in a research activity since April-May time, since the RSA conference, trying to understand what ITDR actually is, why do we need it, the origins, the drivers, capabilities and use cases. So I want to spend the first half of today's webinar just discussing that in a bit of detail, really, what we found out during that process. Why do we need ITDR? What's it trying to achieve? How can the buy side really understand where this sits in the complex identity lifecycle? And then second part, we're going to go into a bit of a discussion around identity threat in general and maybe some of the sort of real world implications of the increasing threat that we're all sort of seeing in both the B2E and the B2C world. But before we dig in, let's do some introductions. My name is Simon Moffat. I'm founder and analyst at the Cyber Hut. I've been in the identity space about 2 decades, which is seems a hell of a long time now, looking back, and certainly seen some huge technological and business changes. Back in 2001, the internet was pretty nascent. We didn't have mobile. We certainly didn't have things like consumer identity and blockchain and all this stuff. So I think things technically have changed hugely. But I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by 3 leading experts from all different parts of the globe, which is fascinating. And I will let them introduce themselves. Maybe Adam, you want to start off with introduction to you, your origins and your current role.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. Adam McElroy. I've been working in identity for almost 25 years. I've worked in everything from product development through systems integration, and most recently in strategy for both government citizen scale programs as well as enterprise identity. And I'm currently the group head of cyber risk at the Bank of Ireland, which is the national champion bank for consumers in the Republic of Ireland. Thank you, Simon.
Super duper, thanks. I guess just to put you on the spot, in those 25 years, what do you think has been the biggest change that you've seen?
I think the most obvious one is the change towards self-sovereign identity. People actually taking ownership and responsibility for their identity as we execute things digitally now in very hybrid environments.
Okay, yeah, that's a huge one. Excellent, thanks, Adam. Andrew, maybe do you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Andrew Cameron. I am a technical fellow in our cybersecurity organization at General Motors. My responsibility is identity and access management and cloud security, and we'll get into why they are so intertwined as it is in today's environments. But I've been in, like Adam and yourself, I've been in the identity space for just short of 20 years. I think 2004 was when I first took a job that it was in that title. When I started off, really, I don't even know if IAM really existed as a discipline. It was more, I was part of the directory services team, right? We supported the enterprise LDAP And
Yeah.
we didn't even have a Active Directory, on our same team, right? That was a whole nother different team that supported it. And it's been exciting to see the evolution of identity. I started off focusing on enterprise IAM and all of the benefits that we would get by promoting things like single sign-on. I evolved over into our consumer-facing IAM about 6 years ago, and so I kind of wear both hats depending on which day it is. And so I've been able to preside architecturally over implementing a identity service that supports tens of millions of our customers today, and all of the challenges that come along with it, of which there are many, and we'll talk about some of that today.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thanks, Andrew. I'm looking forward to learning more about some of that stuff as we go through. And Martin, welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Martin Sander, and I'm the product lead for IAM at ITDR, which is the mother company in the IKEA group. So my job is to ensure that there are around meatballs and flat packages all over the world at a very nice price. That's my job. And I've been also been in the identity space for about 20 years. Actually, my master's thesis when I got left university was about to integrate ERP systems to LDAP authentication. That was new back then.
Wow, and I guess we're still struggling with that, are we? I guess ERP
Yeah,
and LDAP, that's never a comfortable friendship.
No, it's still a bit of a problem, and I think it's a very interesting question. What's the biggest change? And one thing is that if I look at one of the first thing was that I did when I started working was that I did a federation integration between two ERP systems. Back then there was no SAML, so we kind of had to define our own protocols. We took out our crypto book from school and defined all the protocols and so on, and we burned through about 150 days or so of effort on doing this. And today, if I do exactly the same thing with the SAML integration, it's say 5 hours enterprise time. Actual technical work is like 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. So that is, of course, a quite big step that we have taken, that we have shown that if we can get the standards in place and we can get them publicly accepted and really implemented, we can really move the ball on what is possible and how we can add value.
Yeah, no, that's a really insightful point. I think, unfortunately, even as things like standards and documentation and our knowledge improves, the problem statement gets larger. There's more things to do, there are more identities to manage, there are more systems to integrate, and I think I think we're all constantly sort of either chasing the bad guys or chasing technical integrations to make identity work, which is good and bad. But thanks everybody. I think it's certainly it's probably about 80 years worth of knowledge and experience here, which is absolutely fabulous. I guess the next sort of part, quick intro on the Cyberhut, I guess, but Cyberhut, our main role, I suppose, is we want to enable the market. Identity is quite complicated, it's quite nuanced. It's certainly continually evolving and emerging, as we've, I guess, just discovered in a few minutes there. Technology is changing, the use cases are changing, the architecture and the problem statement of identity is constantly changing. So the Cyberhut really looks to try and help do a few things, help enable the market understand vendors, technology, trends through training, enablement, advisory, but really trying to amplify the benefit and need of identity-based security, and all of the tentacles which identity is now reaching. I think it's never been a more exciting time. It's interesting listening to Andrew there. 20 years ago when I started off in LDAP, nobody cared really about this stuff. It was all about maybe operational, internal use cases within identity. Whereas now, today, we make purchases online. We talk about self-sovereign identity. We talk about nation-state attacks. There was an interesting call this morning about disinformation threats around sort of fake news and things, which has a huge identity play as well. So identity is so foundational to everything we do. And I guess things like this webinar, we're trying to enable the market to be better educated, if you like, around some of the complex technology and decisions we're all facing. So the first part of this webinar, and guys, feel free to jump in on this one as well, is I want to really sort of set the scene a little bit around some ITDR research that Cyberhut have done in the last sort of 3 or 4 months. And the output of this was a marketing review or a market review report, which we released in August. And then we essentially looked to try and understand, why is this segment emerging? What is ITDR? Why is it emerging now? What are the use cases? What benefits can it have to the sort of buy side practitioner? And we essentially identified 7 relatively new startups who've been around maybe between 2 and 4 years, who are delivering a range of sort of application agnostic threat detection, response, behavioral modeling style use cases. And we went through a process doing interviews, looking at products, looking at data sheets, getting briefings, working with open source intelligence, looking at case studies, and trying to understand the whole picture around why ITDR, what is it, how can it help the buy side practitioner. And it was some interesting outputs of that process. I think that the biggest was the why. And this is a diagram I use quite a lot, certainly a variation of this diagram quite a lot in workshops and everything else, to try and really, it amplifies why ITDR has suddenly become relevant, because the complexity of identity, I think, has increased pretty exponentially over the last maybe 5 to 8 years, where again, moving away from just being an LDAP focusing on employees to suddenly we have SIAM, we have online e-commerce, we have retail banking, we have the bigger problem statement of what identity is trying to achieve. We have different identity types from the B2C world. We have contractors, gig workers, supply chain of personnel. We've got different assets which these identities are trying to access, be that workforce content, SharePoint APIs, or be that things like online transactions, buying something or maybe moving money around or whatever. So there are lots of things happening, lots of identities being managed. And then we've got this thing in the middle, our identity infrastructure, which again has evolved pretty spectacularly from simply being an LDAP and maybe a few portals, if we can use that word still, legacy portals to access applications. So suddenly we have single sign-on, we have governance and administration, we have adaptive authentication, passwordless authorization in there as well. So suddenly the identity core services are becoming bigger. Maybe they're siloed, maybe they're integrated. They're very likely going to be in a host of distributed locations, from on-premise virtual machines or even servers. Do people use servers anymore? I don't know, but that physical aspect right the way through to software as a service, Amazon and cloud platform service providers as well. So there's a lot of stuff driving a lot of business value. And I think this is suddenly why we're starting to see the adversaries are going, actually, hang on, there's a hell of a lot of stuff in there that we can target, and the benefits to adversarial attacks, be that the internal hacker or perhaps a nation state, is very, very big. The rewards are high. So suddenly I think that why is certainly driving us to look at something different around how we manage this. And this identity attack activity, again, something we track at the Cyber Hut. I'm sure many of us are looking at sort of threat intel reports and stuff, and a lot of these threat intelligence reports, if we boil them down a little bit, rely on identity, credential theft, credential harvesting, privilege abuse, privilege escalation, credential reissuance. A lot of this stuff is leveraging the identity attack infrastructure. And this is an example of this sort of complexity of the enterprise around the supply chain of services, supply chain of personnel. It's all making not only the identity attacks more complex to find, but also the impact of them ends up being a lot higher as well, from a supply chain perspective. And it's just one example, really, of how the IAM infrastructure is becoming a real problem, essentially, from a defensive or a sort of blue team perspective in the what needs to be managed, how it can be controlled, how it can be protected. I think it's unfortunately another example of where the bad guys are seeing some fruits of their labor. How our organization is defending against this. This is something we use in the Cyber Hut as part of our identity threat assessment framework. We have a framework which we help organizations try and identify threat across the identity landscape. And this essentially is an overlay we did looking at some technology within a particular ecosystem. And again, I guess what I'm trying to highlight here is essentially there's lots going on. There are lots of different components, and the green aspect is taken from the NIST cyber security framework, NIST CSF there, which is essentially that 5-step process to identify, protect, etc., your entire cybersecurity ecosystem. And then if we amplify that a little bit on the identity components of this, we're essentially going to get a big matrix, and we're going to have a lot of technology, we're going to have a lot of software, we're going to have a lot of process, a lot of people involved, probably different people, identity, access management, security operations, security engineering, audit, governance, compliance. There's going to be lots of different people within this matrix of defense. And there's a bit of red on here looking at recovery, which tends to be an area which many organizations perhaps struggle to identify and implement solutions for. But I think, unfortunately, many organizations will likely have some red on here. The heat map of red may well be during identification, or perhaps through asset detection or behavior monitoring, etc. There's going to be, unfortunately, a bit of amber and a bit of red on this matrix. And I think, unfortunately, it isn't just about buying software to solve this. I think most security identity leaders, CISOs, etc., don't need any more software. I think they probably need less software, honestly. Sorry, software vendors, but they probably need less. They probably need more people, certainly more process or more understanding and integrations, etc. So we have bad guys on one hand, we have a complex infrastructure on the other. The defense of this realm, if you like, is becoming potentially more complicated and maybe more siloed for the time being. So I guess that backstory is saying, look, maybe we do need something else. And where does ITDR fit in? And I mean, I guess we'll probably cover this in the panel, but I guess, do we need more software? You know, we certainly have existing capabilities within our identity ecosystem that is doing some good stuff. You know, IGA is there looking at posture, it's looking at removing excess permissions. We have things like KIM, cloud infrastructure entitlements management, looking at the whole cloud misconfiguration problem, which I think is a pretty big problem. And then we also have the existing logging systems, user entity behavior analytics, and others looking at, you know, capturing logs based on activity, maybe correlating that to identity information. So we've got stuff. We have Venn diagrams, and we have features and capabilities available to us. Are they all integrated? Maybe some are, maybe some aren't. Does this provide an opportunity for something like ITDR? And so the analysis of the ITDR space and asking the vendors, what do they really think ITDR is about? Clearly, it's an acronym. So we did some research. We published 2 or 3 free articles on this, actually, to amplify a bit of discussion in this space. And we sort of broke this down into the individual letters, which seems a bit obvious, but it actually introduced quite a healthy discussion. The I aspect is all about identity. So the identity infrastructure aspect is big, and it's becoming broader. Not only are we talking about identity services, but we're talking about the different identity types as well. So B2E, B2C, what about machines, services, Internet of Things? The location of this identity infrastructure is also a big problem as well. How you manage and integrate identity services that are located in different places is one thing. The T, threats. Now, again, threat is a hugely ambiguous term. Are we talking about, you know, vulnerabilities within misconfiguration? Are we talking about excess permissions? What about the threat of cascading attacks, where you know, the attacks can be spread out across a huge blast radius? How does the detection mechanism work? Are we looking to detect different parts of the identity lifecycle, misconfiguration rules, misconfiguration of identities, right the way through to integrating threat intel from the threat intelligence platforms and things which are much more runtime related, if you like, or much more behavioral led? And the remediation aspect, I think there's a lot of talk around automation in response and recovery, but I think on investigation, we're really talking about some sort of human integrated remediation and response. Automated playbooks and automatic steps that need to be processed and fulfilled if some bad activity is identified. But we really need to involve the human. And the human could be a security operations person. It could be a line manager to approve account access or remove access. But we still need that human element. That seems to be the end result of those sorts of discussions. I think many organizations probably a little bit early in their workflows and maturity to have everything automatically sort of fixed and remediated by an AI robot just yet. But I guess that is perhaps where we are heading. So we've got some bad stuff. We've got complex infrastructure. We've got this emerging market, or certainly set of vendors looking to tackle something called ITDR. And it's going to be interesting, I think, to monitor and see where this sector is going to be heading over probably the next sort of 2 to 3 years as it emerges. And I think it will emerge. I think it will also alter in its focus. I think there's definitely a little bit of ambiguity at the minute between analyzing threats from a static posture management perspective. So looking at orphan accounts, ghost accounts, excessive permissions, misconfigured Amazon instances, misconfigured rules and roles. That's one part of it. I think the second part is then looking at things like behaviors, threat intelligence integrations, and working out, yes, this is Simon, but is it really Simon who's actually logging in and doing stuff, or is it somebody impersonating me from a bad guy perspective? So I think we'll see stabilization in that, and I think we'll also see stabilization in who will own these platforms and who will get the biggest benefit. Some use cases and capabilities we describe in a bit more detail in the platform. I think clearly we're looking to identify vulnerabilities in the infrastructure of identity. We need to be able to look at and add in context around what those vulnerabilities are referring to. Maybe some sort of automated response. How we get there? These platforms need feeding. They need data. They need identity data. They need data from things like session management and identity provider platforms. They need activity data from either systems or from networks. And they need to somehow join that stuff together, sprinkle some auto magic fairy dust, and identify some bad actions and bad activities within there. So a lot going on. Definitely a lot will change going forward, and hopefully our report, which is available, can give a bit of shine a little bit of a light as to what identity threat detection response is and how it can provide a bit of value to the industry. Now, part of the process, we essentially looked at 7 different vendors. I won't name drop them all here. All global parties, some in Israel, some in Europe, some in North America. That is essentially a quick word cloud generator. And some of their terms, how they describe themselves, so things like visibility threats, compromised, continuous security, etc., is a big part in there as well. But I want to really get onto the meat of some of the detail and what I've been discussing, really, and uncover maybe some of the real practical truths of identity threat and how it really impacts us in the real world by sort of taking some of the concepts that I've quickly been describing there from an ITDR perspective, but really let's ground this a little bit in some real world discussion. I want to bring the chaps in here and really sort of look at threat, I guess, more broadly. And I want to really start with be the voice of the customer here. And do we really need another acronym? Do we need more software? Do we need ITR, or do we have enough software already? And Adam's smiling, so I'm going to go for Adam on this one. Do we need another acronym?
Do you know what? I think another acronym is really quite helpful at the moment, Simon. And I mean, you've touched on a number of emerging trends, and the one you haven't mentioned is zero trust. But I'll mention it in a similar way to ITDR, in the sense that we have all the building blocks for zero trust. We've had them for a long time, but now we have a label for it. It's elevated the message. It's brought things into focus. It's allowed the SOC teams, the architects, and even the business stakeholders to come together in a way they can all understand. So in a similar way, I think having a specific acronym for something that is moving us towards a more dynamic, more real-time appreciation of a threat that originates in an identity ecosystem, whether that's financial fraud for a consumer, whether it's badly managed change for an admin. Having a consistent set of terminology brings all those stakeholders together, and I'm sure it's going to start. It will move us forward, perhaps not quite in the way we're expecting, but I certainly think it's a positive thing for the industry.
It's a good point there, isn't it, around bringing different people together. I think, you know, we've all sort of been in the space a long time, and I think identity now is sort of foundational to everything we do, both for employees, for partnerships, banking, obviously in your area. And I think there are different people involved in this identity journey, whether it's getting value out of identity, looking at threat, looking at management. I think the stakeholder aspect is something which is often overlooked, I think, as well. Well, what do you think, Martin, Andrew? Do we need more acronyms? Do we need more terms?
I think that what ITDR offers is kind of a understandable way to explain to the business why the cybersecurity team and the IM team needs to actually talk and work together. And for that reason, it's quite useful.
Yeah, I agree. It's critical, and I think one of the topics that had circulated around the most recent Identiverse conference was around, and I included in the talk that I did there was around the value of actually the identity team reporting up through the CISO organization. That I think what ITDR as an acronym, yes, I love the visibility that it brings to identity and how critical it is, and zero trust has the same impact, right? It really focuses the criticality of identity in being able to secure the enterprise and secure the customer and their interactions. And if you just go and just take a cursory look at the most recent breaches that have happened in the market, and you'll see that all of them involve attacking the identity infrastructure, right? It all involves attacking the identity infrastructure, compromising it to the extent that they set up command and control, and they're dwelling not months, not weeks and months, but they're actually dwelling days to be able to establish themselves and to be able to do the data extraction or do the encrypting of your data on the network and setting you up for a ransomware activity. It's the ability to leverage these tools to be able to respond quickly is just critical. And yes, I think it's great to be able to bring the visibility to these tools and what they can do, but it's even more important to be able to get them implemented and getting value out of them, because that's where you're going to be able to protect yourself, is to be able to use the data and the visibility that you get out of ITDR to be able to protect yourself and be able to respond to threats.
Yeah, there's a real, in my opinion, there's real synergy with zero trust here, not necessarily from a technical perspective, but in the way it's a process, not a product. I'm not quite sure who said that. I'll steal it if nobody's claiming ownership. But clearly, zero trust isn't this one product, and you can walk around the different conferences and everybody will claim they have the zero trust magic button that you just download and press play and you're zero trustified. And clearly that isn't the case. And I think ITDR, is very similar in some respects, because it isn't just about a single product. And I think the vendors will agree with this. I think there's definitely technology and tooling, yes, but I think there's also engaging with different stakeholders, different people within both the business and the technical ecosystems, from security operations, audit, control. Clearly, identity is a huge role to play. So there's that aspect. And then clearly there's things like process and workflow, how you remediate something, how you respond. We talk about automated response and how we could fix the bad guys. Well, they're actually quite complicated things. If you do identify some bad activity, how do you respond? That has to be repeatable, has to be documented. You have to engage different people, maybe ticketing systems, maybe some automation there as well. So I think the process, not a product thing, definitely sits with zero trust and ITDR. I think that hopefully, if anybody takes anything away from a new sector, it would be that, because I think the worst thing that could probably happen is we download some more software, we press play, and it just falls flat because it needs feeding, watering, integrating, and everything else. So yeah, hopefully that maybe is the mindset for some. But I mean, I think it sounds like the identity world, the attack surface is increasing. Is that fair, or is that just another buzzword? You know, the attack surface where the bad guys are looking at either public facing consumer identity components, login screens, password reset screens. It seems to me that there's just more stuff to attack. Is that a fair basic assumption?
Yeah, I certainly think so, Simon. And building on something I think Andrew said earlier, the volume of data we're facing as defenders on our side of the fence now. How do we simplify that threat detection and response process? There are so many false positives. We're drowning in data collectively. We can instrument so much. We've got so much storage available. Where there are so many different services we're consuming across hybrid clouds with extended supply chains, with vast numbers of participants in them. And we're building communities dynamically. So there are so many potential attack points across that expanded surface, generating unmeasurable amounts of data potentially. And how do we analyze it? And I mean, you did mention AI, and what's a webinar without mentioning AI? How do we use automation in whatever form we want to describe it, to pre-process, to winnow things out, to provide that decision support information for an intelligent, informed individual to actually make a meaningful decision? And that is also a factor of the attack surface. It's a denial of service by generating so much data that we can't spot it.
That's a really good one, isn't it? Yeah, too much stuff, isn't it? It's too much data. and the conversation we've had a few times over the years, I guess, in the cyber is IAM becoming a big data problem? Because we do have data from registrations, from logins, devices, how things and people interact. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and yeah, maybe it is I guess there's certainly this alert fatigue, is something which I hear quite a lot around, security operations centers. They receive alerts for everything, and clearly we need to reduce that alert fatigue, introduce context, which I think is one thing ITDR can help with, in the sense of, if an attack is taking place, overlaying that alert with identity information, who it is, where they've come from, what's the history, behaviors, permissions, devices, etc., which I think can allow us to, I guess, respond more effectively. But I guess, Martin, Andrew, are we under attack more, do you think? Is that fair, Martin? What's sort of view there, do you think?
Well, I think one part that is definitely becoming different is that if you look like 4 or 5 years ago, then you were usually ordered as an IAM person to integrate your system with the SIEM system, be it Splunk or be it ArcSight or something. But what you usually did was that you kind of just happily shipped away your logs, and then you said, bye-bye. I don't think you have any idea what I'm sending you, or I'm quite sure you don't know what it is, and you will never come back with anything. The problem now is that the SIEM system has become a little bit more better, so they can now actually consume meaningful data and start reacting on stuff. But then you start getting, unless you have very strong AML processing and very good order amongst your identities, you will start getting a big flow of events that you need to handle, which are mostly just an indication that your hygiene is lacking. So it's a bit interesting to see that the increasing maturity in cybersecurity has meant that you now have to increase your maturity on the identity side. Otherwise, the total system breaks, because you get so many false positives that you have to then dedicate resources to chase down.
Just to sort of double click a little bit on the cyber aspect of this. I mean, We talk about information security, which is what I still prefer, even though it's the cyber hut. But the information security sort of ecosystem here is relatively well trained, if you like, around security controls. You have something of value that you want to protect, and you look at vulnerabilities. You identify the top ones that you want to sort of put a control against. You have a list of security controls. You put them in place. Everything's great. Hopefully, your risk is reduced, etc. So the sort of information security or cyber security world has relatively good experience. There's frameworks, there's maturity around risk, security controls, assessment, and then clearly that's sort of broken down into a little bit around this threat analysis world, which has emerged over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. So it seems to me we have the sort of cyber team, if you like, the cyber body of skills and knowledge, which is now it's becoming heavily reliant on identity, things like zero trust, things like authorization, things like threat detection and response. So we're starting to see identity, I guess, go into the cyber world. We're also seeing the cyber world coming into the identity ecosystem. So I guess it's the last question on here, but I want to sort of maybe pull it in now. But a cyber and identity merging together, Andrew, any sort of views on this one? Do you think?
Well, I think they absolutely are merging, and I think it's critical that they do merge because of the overlapping dependencies on identity in all aspects of security, right? And so just a note about the attack surface. So now in most enterprises, the most large enterprises, in about a 10-year period, we've moved from focusing on whatever was running in our four walls to let's move to a cloud, to now you literally have a hybrid multi-cloud environment for most companies that are out there today, right? They're involved with multiple clouds, and what is your visibility across all of those environments, right? Can you legitimately have the fine-grained level of visibility to know that you're even being attacked across all of those environments? And that's what what ITDR can bring if implemented correctly, right? Because the challenge is significant in trying to cast that net across your entire expanding and complex attack surface. And you need to be able to make the investment into your tools to be able to kind of give you that visibility, because otherwise, if the malicious attackers are out there, it's too easy to launch attacks now. I mean, you literally have to assume that you are under attack continuously, right? And you have to have tooling and processes in place to be able to respond to it. And it's just a matter of it's I think one of the acronyms I've heard, or one of the metaphors that I've heard about how what it is to be in security now is it's like protecting against running water, right? If you just shot a stream of water at something, and if there were any cracks in the foundation of the water where the water is running, it's going to get through, and that's kind of how attackers are operating today. And that's why it's so important for your identity infrastructure, which is literally the keys to your kingdom, where all of the monitoring and all of the visibility has to be tip top in order to be able to get all of the signals around privileged access and being able to remediate overprivilege in those scenarios. And that's where the zero trust principles come into play to be able to apply those.
I love that analogy. I'm gonna swipe and deploy that concept. I think that's a really good one. I think it's back to that asymmetry, isn't it? The bad guys need to get in once or whatever, and blue team defender needs to defend continually. I think that's part of it. But does that, I guess, either you, Andrew, or others, how we define identity threat, does that change? I mean, I think threat detection and response it seems to be looking at sort of two camps of identity threat. One is the sort of misconfiguration or the data aspect of maybe identities who have excessive permissions, maybe ghost accounts, maybe an account which hasn't logged in for 3 months and then suddenly logs in from a different device, which probably may indicate bad stuff going on. So it's like a hygiene posture aspect. And then there's that runtime behavior stuff, which may indicate, a very recent nation state attack, which is suddenly live, and every week we get alerts around different attack attribution reports there, and they're using very, very sophisticated and nuanced ways of gaining access to a particular system. So how do we need to worry about how we define the threat aspect, or are we just saying, look, this stuff's going to happen? If you don't know about it, well, that's probably the biggest issue, I guess.
I think if I can jump in on that one, Simon, I think it builds nicely on the response that Andrew gave about identity and cyber merging, because who's responsible? Who cares? Is identity of an employee an HR responsibility or a security responsibility? Is the operation of the IGA solution an IT responsibility or a security responsibility? Yeah, where does the threat alert go and who responds to it? And who cares? Who gets to make the decision about that potential impact? And that's where I think the ITDR comes back to the table with the clarity that I think both Martin and Andrew have mentioned. It allows us to focus on the theme. It allows us to bring it to the attention of a senior responsible owner, someone in the business who really is going to be accountable for it. As defenders within predominantly the IT side, we're responsible for keeping the lights on, but it's the senior responsible owner, the sponsor, the exec, who is the person who will stand in front of the regulator, the government, law enforcement, and justify what we did or did not do at a moment in time.
That's a really good point. I think, I guess the flip side for the ITDR vendor will be back to that metrics and success aspect. What does success look like if you are looking to identify threat, respond to threat? How do you measure success? Or is it identifying more threats? Is it reducing the dwell time that the bad guys were in your network? Is it increasing the speed at how you respond? Is it looking at, I read a good quote the other day around things like anything to do with threats you should have a metric which is something that you can control. The adversary's frequency, how they attack, etc., is out of your control, really. So the metrics really should be around stuff that you as an owner can look at. And I think, is that things like visibility? How many systems do you have visibility over? How many systems do you have playbooks or repeatable sort of responses to? Because I think the success thing is difficult, because I think if you tie it to the bad guys' activity, how many attacks you stop, or how many sort of failed logins you capture, etc., it's a little bit out of your control, I think, and that could be. I think that could be quite difficult, certainly when you are stood up to account, accountable metrics there. It's you have to pick the right ones, I think, to measure success, which I think it's a difficult thing to do.
There's a shift left element to this as well, in that you really want to be proactive in your protections as much as possible rather than reactive, right? And that's where being the security principles and design guidance has to be embedded into your app dev and your CI/CD pipelines to be able to do as much detection and remediation as possible, prior to anything ever getting into a production environment. And it's challenging, and it piles on more responsibility to the security organization to do that. But to be able to provide the right level of guidance to your app dev teams, because they're not going to come in with the specific guidance around how to implement security within their authorization within their API services securely. We're going to have to give them the guardrails to kind of stay within, right? And that's something that is a horizontal organizational responsibility to be able to provide that guidance as much as possible. And to get in front of it as much as you can is really it's going to be a benefit, because if you're responding, if you're chasing them after they've already gotten in, your odds of success and being protected, they would diminish to me.
That's a really, really good point there. I guess bring you, Martin, here on this one around. We talk about threat, and we often talk about the external bad guys. You're the guy with the hoodie. I've got lots of hoodies. Hits and to add, not hoodieist there at all, but it's the guy with the hoodie who's doing the attacking, and we don't know who he is, and it's scripted, and it's this external hacker. But clearly, there are internal issues to deal with as well, whether it's the malicious insider, the insider threat, who perhaps is, I don't know, maybe selling intellectual property to whoever, to somebody who's prepared to pay the highest price. We also have the accidental insider there as well. The guy who is trying to do the job, but they can't because either the process is rubbish, or maybe there isn't a process, and they have to use their home device, or perhaps they have to use a shared account or whatever. So we have the insider versus external aspect, as well as malicious versus accidental. I just want to sort of bring you in there, man. Your experience around sort of governance and identity in general. Do we need to worry about the two camps? And if so, do we need to worry about them differently, I suppose?
To a certain degree, I think you can. And I think that we have a kind of, as employers, we have an ethical obligation of not putting our employees into temptation. It's a little bit that the opportunity makes the thief. I remember once I was the QA director on an engagement a few years ago at a major financial institution where we were going to try out their PAM system. And to be honest, I didn't think that we were going to get something, because the system was a really good system, was built by the leading vendor in the space, and it was implemented by the leading vendor. But it basically turned out that you could, by manipulating certain attributes, you'd see things you shouldn't see. And we could even say that you could see things that the entire purpose of the system was to hide it. So for a little while, we were thinking that, of course, we did this in the pre-prod. We didn't see the real keys. But we were thinking that, we take this information and go and talk to the people who sits one story up in the building that's actually doing this prod. Probably transfer a set amount of billions of euros somewhere nice and sunny. So one part of this is that you kind of need to make sure that the systems, it's very easy that you can become an accidental insider just because you discover that, hey, but where is the security controls for this? Where is the segregation of duty? It's very easy to get around it, or perhaps not easy, but it's possible. You do see also a little bit, was a very interesting podcast a few weeks ago about a firm that it kind of looks at things a little bit differently from normal when you look at the typical authorization engines. Instead of being the cop who directs the traffic, said, okay, from an authorization perspective, I want to be able to surface who has access to what data in very complex system. In this case, CIM system and related. And that's a very interesting conceptual difference, that you provide the insights and then kind of highlights what is really the things that we need to worry about. And there, of course, where the AI comes in, that you have this system for recertification, for example, and normally as a manager, you might have, if you're unlucky, you might have hundreds of users you need to recertify. You might be the data owners on hundreds of entitlements that you have to. And most people, at least when they get like 150 people that they have to recertify, they go like, yes, because the cost of making a mistake on yes is 0, but the cost of no is significant. So suddenly a process fails and you have to go and have to fix it, and then someone is going to ask, why did you remove this access? So what AI and similar things can do is that it can say, okay, out of these 150, there might be 140 that are kind of in their peer group, while 10 are problematic and 5 looks really strange. So that could help your employees to use their time and efforts more efficiently. And in the ITDR space, it's the same thing, that the threat hunters can really focus on the ones that are important, not just all the noise.
I think it's absolutely spot on. Definitely a case of reducing the workload, whether it's approvers in the IGA space or alerts within the sort of SecOps space, and focusing on the risk, isn't it? It's the high risk. It's the sort of 80-20 rule, and maybe get that position where 80% is handled automatically, or at least in a position where it can be rapidly remediated, and then focus again on the things which tip the needle, as they say, whether it's from a security perspective or from maybe a business revenue perspective there. And I think we have certainly the concepts around doing that, adding in amplification and automation to try and help do that. I guess the next sort of next double click on that, I guess, is the compelling event, and again, open to all of us really, I suppose. What is the compelling event to say, look, we are going to go and reduce the workload, or reduce the threat workload, or the governance workload? But where's the compelling event here? Is it organizations who perhaps have been breached and they understand the impact and cost of going through the publicity or the actual monetary impact of a data breach, or is it something else? Well, what other compelling events may exist to either look at ITDR, or more importantly, look at identity threat in general? What compelling events would I guess focus the mind a little bit?
I think in general, you have, of course, when a peer or a competitor or a close ally gets breached, then you see that this is actually real. That's the strongest compelling event. I do see also that red teaming exercises have an ability to actually demonstrate that, hey, this is real. That when the red teamers actually do get through, it also makes things a little bit more real and not just theoretical.
I think that, yeah, the neighbor getting broken into is a good one, isn't it? That's quite a nice way of thinking about it, isn't it? Who in your sector either has a level of maturity in their deployments which you want to sort of get to, or, as you say,
it's a great point, because we work very closely with our third-party supplier community on socializing and communicating best practices around our security integrations, because to be able to function as a business, right, there's huge integration requirements for all of our community, and it's a breach to any of our supplier partners is something that could affect all of us, right? And so that's something that we work with them pretty regularly on. There's actual cross industry committees that are in place that help drive security best practices across the organizations, got to bring that awareness and to make that so everyone can benefit from that level of knowledge. So it is really important what Martin's calling about.
No, that's a really.
And I hate regulation as a compelling event, but we have. We have the senior exec accountability regime, we have NIS2, and very shortly we have DORA. And I think DORA builds on Andrew's point precisely there about that extended supply chain and the relationships we have, and the role that plays in the identity attack surface. And maybe that's another excuse to elevate the message, take it to a different group of stakeholders, and demonstrate how ITDR can have a meaningful role to play in achieving the mandatory outcomes that we're all going to be driving for over the next 12 to 18 months.
I think it's fair. I mean, this regulation is there for a reason. There's market failures, I guess, in all sectors around allocation of security and stuff. So yeah, it's we shouldn't bash the regulators too much, I guess. But yeah, it's certainly, I think it keeps a lot of people up at night. I'm conscious we're sort of coming towards the end of our discussions here, and I guess there's a couple of questions for the audience that I want to quickly cover as well. But one last thing I want to ask you all. I guess if you can answer in 30 seconds, what would be the one thing that you'd want our audience, regardless of their sort of sector or stuff, if it comes to things like identity threat or identity security in general, what would be the one thing that you would advise people to focus upon or aim towards, I guess, putting you on the spot there a little bit?
It's not a technical
one. Andrew, go on.
I'll jump in here. I think it's much less of a technical solution than people think. I think we touched on some of it earlier. I think it is a heightened importance on processes and how much are you automating the data that gets you to the decisions and awareness that you need, right? If you are involved in too much manual activity to get to the answers you need to be able to understand how to protect yourself, then that's probably where you need to apply some focus, because the attackers are fully automated and fully capable, right? And so if you're not able to be agile and be able to move with that same velocity, that's where you're going to be vulnerable.
That's good points. Adam, Martin, anything else to add?
I would like to see everyone build more integrity into their estate, and whether we're talking about the disinformation, whether we're talking about non-repudiation of a transaction when you're going to put it on the blockchain. If I put something bad on the blockchain, it's still bad. If I want to check the integrity of my news source, well, I'm going to go to a news source I trust in preference to something I can get from a search engine. How do we build that integrity into the digital economy, where we've got, as Andrew explained, tens of millions of consumers? How do we know they're really our consumer when they ask us to do a thing on their behalf? So more integrity, please.
That's a good one. Yeah.
And I
Martin,
think
anything
as
else?
part of that, also they start looking at blast radius. See, how do you ensure that the attacker is going to get through? So how do you make sure that they aren't able to, or at least it becomes harder for them to elevate all the way to the main admin? And then also look at the backups and restores. See, do you have backups? And then can you restore from them if you have backups?
Yeah, backups are a nightmare, aren't they? It's people have them, they never test, they work, which is always the ultimate dilemma. All right, guys, thank you for some of those excellent points. There's a couple of questions I just want to quickly add in here from the audience. Fabrice asked a little bit earlier on, actually, in the chat. I hope he's still with us. He is still with us. He says, although I largely agree with the benefits of ITDR in terms of visibility and language, and as a collaboration catalyst, I also wonder about the implications they have on the people and process side of things. And we're starting to see vendors adding this into their trade as well. So I guess we're talking about, what we were saying earlier, it's the process and people aspect here as well. Is that as important as the software?
I think it's more important, actually. Like I said in my previous response, I think that to be properly organized to respond to threats and attacks is where you can win, right? If you don't have the people and processes in place to be able to respond with agility, then that's where you're going to be more vulnerable.
Okay.
And focusing on the response part of this, Simon, there was a great conference last week in London, and one of the presenters there emphasized, during a response, they have a role for a chief care officer to look after the people during the response, because heroes can burn out. So the personnel aspect is really important.
It's a really good one. Yeah, excellent. One more quick question from Paul. He says, as we unpack the MGM breach, and a quick shout out, we did this on the Weekend Identity podcast a couple of weeks ago, actually. The recent MGM breach of the US and the Scattered Spider group, which was attributed for this. They were essentially going after the IDP for initial access and leveraging Federation to gain access to a wider range of applications. I guess what the question is where do you see the line between ITDR and other solutions, with Gartner saying identity threat detection stops at the IDP layer? Any last minute comments there? I guess how broad should ITDR be, I guess, is probably the question.
It should apply to all of your identity infrastructure. I think it is more than the IDP. I think in the MGM breach and a few others that occurred over the past few weeks, they also attacked the identity bridge, the identity sync infrastructure, in that there were some practices where privileged accounts were getting synced from on-prem, which is not necessarily a good thing. And so, the estate of all of your identity assets, which grows because of the attack surface is growing, that needs to be consumed in all of your ITDR reporting.
Perfect. Adam, Martin, anything else?
Yeah, I wouldn't really see ITDR as a system, more as a process and a way to work together between the cyber and the IM team. So the entire concept that IM sits here and there's cyber, and here the responsibility stops. That's kind of where the entire thing that ITDR tries to resolve. That is this big firewall between that no one talks to each other over it.
Perfect. That's a good valid point. Conscious of time now. Been a fascinating discussion. Some absolute experts here from the world of identity. Really thank you all for providing your insights. You always learn something from speaking to all collectively and individually. So thank you for your inputs there. A couple of calls to action again. Reach out to us either individually or on socials, or certainly to the Cyberhut directly with any ITDR and threat related conversations. We would love to hear about them, and certainly reach out to us with regards to the ITDR report, which we'll probably send a link actually to everybody who has attended today with some further details. Gentlemen, it has been an absolute thorough investigation into identity threat. So again, thank you once more for your attendance and participation. And until next time, thank you everybody for attending, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.